1 in 4 Americans has no job. Banks are failing at a rate of dozens per week. Farmers are destroying their own crops, pouring milk into ditches, burning wheat, because prices have collapsed so far that selling the harvest costs more than it earns. In cities across America, men who owned businesses a year ago are standing in lines that stretch around the block waiting for a bowl of soup. Children are going to school hungry. Families are living in cardboard cities on the edges of town. Shanty towns that Americans with bitter humor have named after the man they blame for all of it. Hoovervilles. This is the Great Depression at its lowest point, the worst economic catastrophe in American history, possibly in modern history. And into this crisis walked Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In his first 100 days in office, FDR launched the most ambitious government intervention in peacetime American history. Programs, agencies, regulations, a sweeping attempt to rebuild a broken economy from the ground up. He called it the New Deal. 80 years later, historians are still arguing about whether it worked. Did FDR save America? Or did his policies actually make the Depression last longer than it had to? That is the question this video is going to answer. Or rather, it's going to give you the evidence from both sides and let you decide. To understand what FDR inherited, you have to understand what Herbert Hoover did and didn't do. Hoover was not a stupid man. He was not a cruel man. He was, by any measure, one of the most accomplished individuals ever to reach the presidency. A self-made millionaire, a celebrated humanitarian who had organized food relief for millions of Europeans after World War I. But his response to the Depression was shaped by a belief that would prove catastrophic, that the economy was fundamentally self-correcting, and that government intervention would only make things worse. He cut spending, he raised taxes. He signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930, one of the most consequential economic mistakes in American history, which we'll return to, and he waited for the market to fix itself. It didn't. In the summer of 1932, 20,000 World War I veterans marched on Washington. They were demanding early payment of bonuses promised to them for their service, bonuses not scheduled to be paid until 1945. General Douglas MacArthur, with tanks and tear gas, drove the veterans out of the Capitol. The optics were catastrophic. A president using military force against the men who had fought for their country. By November 1932, Hoover lost the presidential election to FDR in one of the biggest landslides in American history. Roosevelt won 42 of 48 states. The Depression didn't begin with Hoover. It began with a crash. October 24, 1929, Black Thursday. The New York Stock Exchange collapsed in a selling panic that wiped out billions of dollars of wealth in hours. By the time the dust settled, the market had lost 89% of its value from its 1929 peak. But the stock market crash alone didn't cause the Depression. What turned a crash into a catastrophe was a series of policy failures that compounded each other. First, the banks. When the market crashed, banks that had invested depositors' money in stocks began to fail. When people heard their bank might be in trouble, they rushed to withdraw their savings. This created bank runs, which caused more banks to fail, which caused more panic, which caused more runs. Between 1930 and 1933, over 9,000 American banks failed. 9,000, wiping out the savings of millions of ordinary Americans who had done nothing wrong. Second, the Federal Reserve. Rather than pumping money into the economy to stabilize the banking system, the Federal Reserve, the institution specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of crisis, actually raised interest rates in 1931. Economists today consider this one of the greatest policy mistakes in the history of central banking. Third, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff. In 1930, Congress raised import tariffs to historic levels, trying to protect American industry. Other countries retaliated with their own tariffs. International trade collapsed by 65% in 3 years. An American recession became a global depression. And then, as if economic catastrophe weren't enough, the Dust Bowl. Decades of intensive farming had stripped the topsoil from the Great Plains. When severe drought hit in the early 1930s, the soil simply blew away. Massive dust storms, black blizzards, buried farms, killed livestock, and forced hundreds of thousands of families off their land. The Okies, the migrants, the people John Steinbeck would write about in The Grapes of Wrath. By 1933, the American economy had contracted by nearly 30%. Unemployment stood at 25%. Industrial production had fallen by half. This was the situation Franklin Roosevelt inherited on March 4, 1933. Roosevelt's first act as president set the tone for everything that followed. He declared a bank holiday. Every bank in America closed for 4 days while the government assessed which ones were solvent. When they reopened, only the healthy banks were allowed to resume operations. The bank runs stopped almost immediately. Then came the programs. The first 100 days of Roosevelt's presidency produced an astonishing volume of legislation. So many new agencies were created that they became known simply by their initials, the alphabet agencies. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. Young unemployed men were put to work in national parks and forests, planting trees, building trails, fighting erosion. 3 million men served in the CCC over its 9-year existence. They planted over 3 billion trees. The WPA, the Works Progress Administration, the largest New Deal agency. It employed 8.5 million Americans over 8 years, building 650,000 miles of roads, 125,000 public buildings, 75,000 bridges, and thousands of parks. It also paid unemployed writers, artists, musicians, and photographers, producing a cultural legacy that still lines the walls of post offices and courthouses across America. Glass-Steagall. The Banking Act of 1933 separated commercial banking from investment banking, preventing banks from gambling with depositors' money. It also created the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which guaranteed individual bank deposits up to $2,500. Social Security, perhaps the most lasting legacy of the New Deal, signed in 1935, it created a federal safety net for retired workers, the unemployed, and the disabled. For the first time, Americans had a guarantee that old age would not mean destitution. The ALEA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, paid farmers to reduce production, raising crop prices to sustainable levels. These were not small interventions. This was a fundamental reimagining of the relationship between the American government and its citizens. But not everyone was convinced it was working. The men and women you're seeing right now, they lived through something most of us will never fully understand. Here is where the story gets complicated. Because a growing body of economic historians argues that the New Deal, whatever its humanitarian achievements, actually prolonged the Depression by years. The argument goes like this. Government spending on the scale FDR attempted required massive borrowing and taxation. This crowded out private investment. Businesses that might have hired workers and expanded production instead held back, uncertain about the regulatory environment, the tax burden, and the constant stream of new government intervention. FDR himself was inconsistent. He believed in balanced budgets as much as he believed in relief spending. In 1937, convinced the economy had recovered sufficiently, he dramatically cut federal spending and raised taxes. The result was immediate and brutal. In 1937 and 1938, the U.S. economy collapsed again. Unemployment, which had fallen from 25% to 14%, shot back up to nearly 19% within a year. Critics point to this as evidence that the New Deal had not fixed the underlying economy. It had simply substituted government spending for private activity. The moment the government pulled back, the economy collapsed again. There's another argument, that the New Deal's labor regulations and the power it gave to unions raised wages faster than productivity could support, which actually reduced employment by making workers more expensive to hire. And then there are the Supreme Court battles. FDR's frustration with the Supreme Court, which had struck down several New Deal programs as unconstitutional, led him to propose his famous court-packing scheme in 1937, adding up to 6 new justices to the court to guarantee favorable rulings. Congress refused. Even members of his own party called it an overreach. It was the first major political defeat of his presidency, and it raised a question that echoed through the following decades. Where does legitimate crisis response end and executive overreach begin? So, did it work? The honest answer is it depends on what you mean by work. The numbers are clear on one thing. The Depression did not end with the New Deal. In 1940, 7 years after FDR took office, 7 years of unprecedented government intervention, unemployment in the United States still stood at 14.6%. By any historical standard, 14.6% unemployment is a catastrophic economic crisis. The Depression ended with World War II. When America entered the war after Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the federal government began spending on a scale that dwarfed even the New Deal. Unemployment essentially vanished overnight as men went to war, and women went to work in factories producing the weapons and equipment to fight it. But the numbers are also clear on something else. Between 1933 and 1937, GDP grew at an average annual rate of over 9%. Unemployment fell from 25% to 14%. Industrial production nearly doubled. People were better off than they had been. Not recovered, but better. And perhaps most importantly, the banking system was stable. The runs had stopped. People's savings were protected. Whether or not the New Deal ended the Depression, it prevented the complete collapse of the American financial system. And that is not a small thing. Whatever verdict history gives on the economics of the New Deal, one thing is inarguable. Franklin Roosevelt permanently changed what Americans expect from their government. Before the New Deal, the federal government had almost no role in the daily economic lives of ordinary citizens. There was no Social Security, no federal unemployment insurance, no federal deposit insurance, no minimum wage, no regulation of the stock market. After the New Deal, all of those things existed. The assumption that the government has a responsibility to protect citizens from economic catastrophe. That assumption was created by Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. The infrastructure is still there too. Roads and bridges built by the WPA, national parks shaped by the CCC, public buildings decorated with murals painted by unemployed artists in the 1930s. Roosevelt governed through crisis in a way no American president had before. He spoke to Americans directly, through his fireside chats, radio broadcasts that brought the president's voice into living rooms across the country, and he told them over and over that the government was on their side. The only thing we have to fear, he said on the day he was inaugurated, is fear itself. Whether or not the New Deal worked economically, it worked psychologically. It told a broken country that it was not alone, and for millions of Americans in 1933, standing in bread lines and living in Hoovervilles, that was not nothing. The Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1941, 12 years. It shaped an entire generation. People who never threw away food, who kept cash under mattresses, who worked until they dropped because they remembered what it felt like when there was no work to be found. FDR served 4 terms. He died in office in April 1945, 13 days before the end of the war in Europe, never seeing the victory he had done so much to achieve. So here is the question we started with. FDR saved American democracy, or he extended the Depression by years with policies that crowded out private recovery. Which side do you come down on? Leave your answer in the comments. The debate is still very much open.